morning, everyone. Welcome back to our Fashion Business Executive Roundtable that we host every first Tuesday of the month at 11:30 Pacific Standard Time. We're excited to have you. This is our third year going into this. We're excited to be able to continue to bring value to every single one of you. I would love to just thank for everyone who has been following us, who has been watching our replays, as well as giving us comments, feedback, and reshare. This helps us to identify and know that we are delivering value on every month and helping you solve some of the challenges with your business and continue to allow you to grow your business. But before we kind of get into more of a technical conversation today, I want to set up the tone of how this session really works. This is a roundtable. It's not a webinar, it's not a presentation, and it's definitely not a lecture about finance. So today we're really going to talk about different opportunities and different places that you can look under the hood and find profit leaks and hidden costs where you can be able to do some hidden cost savings. And because the reality is really most fashion founders and operators already know margins matter. And you already know that the inventories matters a lot. And you already know that the cash flow matters a lot. The challenge is to really understanding how all of these pieces connect together inside a growing brand. What I've learned over the years is that most brands don't get into a trouble because they don't understand the product. Most brands get into a trouble because they don't fully understand the economics behind the product. And that is exactly what we're going to unpack today. But for those who don't know who I am and who are joining us for the first time or watching our replay for the first time, welcome to our series. I'm really excited to have you here. My name is Evgenia Alexandrovna Yushkova, or simply Ye. I'm a fashion and retail business consultant, and I work with brands and retailers to redesign the commercial and operational systems that drive profitability. We're not so much focusing on marketing, branding, or social media aspect of it. We're actually focusing on economic engine behind the business. We focus on processes, operations, merchandising, your assortment, your supply chain, to be able to discover those hidden profit leaks and help you to be more profitable at the bottom line. And one of the most things we see when companies reach out to us, somewhere between anywhere of $1 million to $20 million in revenue, that this is their one of the number one pain points, where their revenue is growing and demand is there. Customers really like their product. However, somehow profit isn't improving at the same rate. Cash feels tighter, inventory feels heavier, and every season seems more complicated than the last. If any of that sounds familiar, you are not alone. In fact, that's usually the moment when leadership starts realizing that the problem isn't the demand. The problem is the system behind the demand. I'd love to introduce to you my colleague, as well as a really dear friend and we've worked really well together for many, many years, Mary Stenny. So Mary, welcome and thank you for joining the roundtable with your wonderful, valuable insight. And I'd love to just, Mary, give you a moment to introduce yourself so the audience get to understand who you are and what amazing background and insight that you're bringing in today.
Well, thank you, Ye, for inviting me and allowing me to join you today. My name is Mary Stanny. I am a financial, worked in the financial business for 35 years, both in accounting, budgets, analyzing merchandise spend. I did this for as I said, 35 years for a very large company named Follett, where we had major different types of products, everything from clothing to books to miscellaneous paraphernalia. So I have a lot of experience at looking deep down at different profitability and why things are profitable. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And throughout our today's conversation, occasionally I will be bringing in Mary because I really think it's important to connect what happens operationally inside the brand with what eventually shows up in a financial statements and what actually shows up when we're starting to unravel where does the bottom line profitability really goes, and why is that often we are selling more, bringing in more revenue, but yet still not profitable as we hoped. And how do we actually solve for that? Let me start with a question to everyone, and feel free to send your comments and questions and answers in comments as you are watching this live. We are looking at them. We are going to try to address them on a call. If not, I will definitely address them offline afterwards. So your comments help us to keep this conversation more engaging, and your answers would really help us as well. So just thinking through, when you look at your business today, what worries you more? Is it really a growing revenue or protecting profit while you have grown? And often, I'm starting to seeing some answers that are trickling in. Thank you guys for sending them over. So I can see that some of you guys are saying that growing revenue is more important, but yet I'm also seeing people who are saying protected profit is also super important. And it's really interesting. What specifically makes this challenge relevant right now is what's really harder to predict is inventory, margins, cash flow, or demand. And what we often see is before, I'd say probably about 6-7 years ago, majority of clients would always answer these questions with, yes, we want to grow more revenue. We are starting to see that more of our clients are now actually trying to focus on how can they protect more profit while they're growing revenue. And what's interesting is that really we are really looking at the lens through the times that we are going through a recession period of where we have to understand that there's two ways to make more money. One is to bring more sales, or another one is to optimize on internally so that you are stop bleeding the profit at the bottom line and be able to come out more profitable. It's not always more revenue equals more profitability. Mary, do you see that? Have you seen that in your experience to be true?
Absolutely. I think people react to the times, which exactly is what they're doing. But to your point, you can't just look at revenue growth ever, because that's going to be a big mistake every company at any size is going to make. You really need to look at the whole picture. You need to look at all the different aspects, because even though your revenue is growing, you absolutely, it doesn't matter what time, what the economy is going through. If you don't look at all the different things that are going to go into that sale, you are going to lose money, or lose more money than you think. And then it's going to be a whole month, a whole quarter, a whole year is going to be gone. And you're going to say, whoa, what happened? So yeah, I think people do react, and instead of reacting, they need to plan.
Agree. I cannot agree with you more 100% on what you just mentioned. And really, there is one idea that I want everyone to keep in the back of their mind throughout this conversation today, that units economics is not really just a financial topic. This is the result of the hundreds of decisions being made across the business, across your organization. It's the merchandising decisions, the pricing decisions, inventory, supply decisions, promotional decisions for your marketing, the channels decisions, which channels you're actually going to sell and which ones are actually going to be more profitable for you. And what makes this challenging is that every one of those decisions looks reasonable by itself. But when they are really misaligned, they quietly destroying profitability. And usually our clients who come in often does not notice this until the company reaches to the point where growth starts feeling heavier instead of feeling easier. So let's start with one of the biggest misconceptions I see in the growing fashion brands. The assumptions that revenue margins and profits are telling you the same story. They are not. This really thinking about how to look at it in the different ways is going to be so critically important. And Mary, I'd love for you to weigh in to kind of talk a little bit about why are they not the same thing, and what are the type of things that people want to look into to ensure that they are capturing the things that they will mostly impact their bottom line profitability that are often missed.
Thank you, Ye. Exactly. What people actually look at is they say, hey, I bought this product for $50 and I'm going to sell it for $100, and so I'm going to make a 50% margin. What they're not realizing is that what are all the incidental costs for that? What is the cost of storing that inventory? What is the cost of shipping that, packaging it? Everything from the design, et cetera, they're not looking at the whole picture. They're just looking at how much it costs for it to be made, and think, oh my goodness, I'm going to make $50 on that product, when at the end of the day they only make 20. So it's very important that they look at the whole picture, that they look at every aspect of it, and they need to continue to look at it throughout the period. I mean, they don't look at potential returns. They don't look at whether the merchandise is going to be not well made when they get it. What they're going to have to send some stuff back to the merchandise people. It's a lot of things they're not looking at that they should be.
Absolutely. And this misunderstanding really can become an incredibly expensive mistake, because it often underlooked, because we're again looking at large pillars that are common knowledge, but especially for the brands who are just growing or who've reached that threshold of where they're actually transitioning from a startup growing brand into more of a growing, evolving brand, is where those things that they might have not looked at when they were initially setting themselves up for success, or not including that as part of their cost sheets, are potentially now hurting their bottom line profitability. Let me ask you a question, like everyone who is listening in or going to review this replay, how many of you ever had a season where sales exceeded expectations, but somehow the business didn't feel significantly heavier afterwards? I'm sure getting a lot of thumbs up. So thank you guys for it. It's true. This happens all the time, whether you're a seasoned business or whether you are a starting up business. You have to be mindful about those hidden costs that are important to gather. And I just want to pause here for a second and welcome Zephyr, who just joined, to you really from your experience within the inside of large retail organization, which you would think that they have everything buttoned up and in order from financial aspect. How often did the leadership teams confuse product popularity with the product profitability?
Often. They get excited. It's emotional. They see high sales. I've been in the organization I was in. I remember vividly every day. Them celebrating a successful sales day, only to at the end of the month, when we actually added it all together, it was like, oh my goodness, wait a second. Yeah, sales were great, but yet we lost money. And then they're backing up and trying to figure out why they lost money. Well, they lost money because, again, I think the biggest issue is collaboration between departments and making sure that everybody understands what the different costs are that are going to make up the total margin. But yes, people definitely at all size organizations celebrate wins, and they celebrate wins with big sales, and they don't look at the whole thing. Sometimes the little sales are going to make a lot of money.
You're absolutely right, because a lot of the times we do not scale for profit. We scale for assumptions, right? We scale for what we're assuming is going to sell.
Yeah, and it's too easy. It's an easy thing to say. I need to make more money. I need to make more sales. Is going to translate to more cash, when in reality it might not. A smart leader looks at all the variables and doesn't just look at sales. Sales is just one piece. They need to look at the whole picture, their whole financial statement. A good leader is somebody who's going to go in and pick the right products. And sometimes those products might not be quantity big sellers. It's not all about quantity, it's about quality and how much it costs.
Absolutely. The best sellers really does not always equals that they're the best product. And we've covered that multiple times in our previous roundtables, right? Where we're starting to talk about the assortment and how we need to conquer and divide and tier up the assortment of which ones are your revenue drivers, which ones are your profitability drivers, right? And so forth. So thinking through about highest revenue often does not equal the best category. And the fastest growing product equals sometimes doesn't mean that it's the strongest opportunity. And those assumptions can really be incredibly dangerous for the business, because revenue can hide inefficiencies, revenue can hide inventory problems, revenue can hide margin leakage, and revenue can hide operational strengths. And that's why many companies really eventually reach a moment where they ask, why are we working harder than ever and not seeing as much profits? That question is usually the first signal that company has to understand that they has outgrown the way that it currently understands their economics. And this is the time to do an audit. This is the time to really reevaluate. And once that realization starts happening, the next place we usually look at cost, because the most brands believe that the cost is a problem, and often turns out to be really a visibility problem. So let's talk about one of the biggest blind spot in a growing fashion brand business is true COGS. And Mary, I know that you love this subject because we've talked about this all the time. So really, let's build on what we just discussed. And if a contribution margin is ultimately what determines whether the product is helping or hurting the business, then the next question becomes, do we actually know what that product costing us? And I know that sounds like a simple question. Most founders will immediately say, of course, we know our costs. Of course, we know what our vendors have quoted. We know our landed costs. Absolutely. But what we found out over the years is that most brands don't actually know their costs. What they know is what their FOB pricing potentially is, or even maybe what their DDP landed pricings are. And they know what they're paying to the factories. But tell you, some of you guys do know what your landed costs are, and including duties and freight. But very few have really complete picture of what truly costs to bring that product into business and get into the hands of the customer. And this is what Mary is actually mentioning. This is where the disconnect often happens between the merchandising team or design team or your product development team, whomever is owning your costing in your organizational structure, with the marketing misalignment team, with the operational and production teams. This is where it actually usually hides. And the reason this matter isn't because we're trying to build more complicated spreadsheet for your cost sheet, but it's because every major decision in the business sits on top of that number. Pricing decision sits on top of that number. Inventory decision sits on top of that number. Hiring decision sits on top of that number. The amount of resources allocation and how much time it's actually taking them to do the work or development is sitting on top of that number. So that number, if that number is really wrong, the decisions built on top of it usually are wrong too. And I'd love to hear from everyone, and please do put your comments below. When you think about the cost inside of your business today, where do you feel that the least confident? Do you feel least confident in freight not numbers, or your inventory numbers, or your production costs, for example, or your forecasting. Or maybe it's something else entirely different. I'd love to hear from you guys. This will help us to also understand. And this usually where someone tells me that the freight or inventory, the forecasting, and honestly, those answers are usually all connected. One of the biggest mistakes I see growing brands make is treating the cost as a static number. But the cost isn't static. Cost behaves differently depending on the decisions that you make. Let me give you an example. Imagine two brands. They're selling essentially the same product, the same retail price, the same suppliers, the same category. On paper, their cost looks nearly identical. Yet one brand is significantly more profitable. Why do you think that happens? Because one of them understands cost behaviors. The others only understands unit cost. The first brand understands what happens if the brand spikes unexpectedly, what happens if they need to air freight, and what happens if the supplier increases the MOQ. What happens if the return rate increases? What happens if the inventory sits on for 2 months longer than expected? This is where we get into the scenario planning to understand what type of scenarios could potentially skew your whole profitability assumption and be prepared for those scenarios, while the second brand doesn't. And that's where the profitability starts to leak. Mary, I'd love to really for you to bring into our conversation here and telling us, having worked inside the large retail organization, where did you most often see the leadership teams underestimated the true cost of doing business?
I think one of the things you mentioned, which was incredible, is how long it stays on the shelf. So now all of a sudden you're bringing in inventory and you're, depending on your terms with your vendors, I mean, these are all things you need to look at. If your terms are, 90 days or 60 days or 30 days or upon receipt, you need to realize that if you are going to sit on the inventory for 3 months, that now all of a sudden you might be paying interest because you had to pay the vendor first. You haven't received your sales yet. And you don't even take into account that high interest rate that you may be incurring, depending on how large your company is. So understanding carrying costs to that granular level is incredible. I think that and the return rate are two of the biggest mistakes people make.
And you're absolutely right. It's such an important point that you're just making here, because most companies don't really get hurt by the cost that they know about. They're getting hurt by the cost they didn't think to model, right? They didn't think
Correct.
to play out a scenario that they assumed that their return rate will only be under 5%, but yet this particular product is getting returned on an average of 15%. This is where the scenario modeling is so critically important. And to your point, looking at it more frequently than just looking at it quarterly or yearly is incredibly important, especially for new products that you are just testing out or you're just launching. We have to be able to understand and have that in place so that we could be able to quickly pivot. And this is where the scenario planning is so important.
And yeah, the other piece is operationally the storage of the merchandise at an offsite. You're those costs, depending on the size of the product, you need to really evaluate your storage facility. Are they going to charge you based on how big a product is, how many cartons the size, how much are on their pallets? Now all of a sudden you're bringing this stuff in. Did you take into account that, oh my goodness, this particular product is going to cost me X amount more because of the size, because it's, and it might not even be that much bigger, but it is big enough.
Oh, for sure. And that lets me really to talk about something that also creates tremendous amount of confusion for growing brands is the channels. It's sales channels expansion. Because as you're growing, you are expanding into different channels. You're looking at where can I be able to get more revenue? Can I reach more customer in potentially diversifying your sales channel? And you should be able to diversify. You cannot rely and should never rely just on one channel alone, because if that fails, your whole business goes out of the business. You need to at least have two. This is what we often look at, the wholesale versus the D2C. And then when from the D2C side, we'll look at, do we do direct sales, but then can we supplement that with potentially third-party channels like Amazon or Walmart and so forth? Or do we also potentially supplement that with a different type of, social selling or live selling? Because one of the most common assumptions I see that most revenue automatically means a stronger business. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable. The revenue is good, the growth is good, new customers are good. But the questions that a lot of our clients eventually have to ask is, what kind of revenue we actually growing? I worked with brands that were growing quickly through direct-to-consumer sales, and the top line looked fantastic. The team was excited, customer acquisition was working, sales were increasing. Does that sound familiar to a lot of you guys? I'm getting thumbs up. Yes, we're all facing this. This is a reality that we all live in. And yet somehow cash was not getting tight, was getting tighter. Inventory was getting heavier, and profitability wasn't improving. Right? I mean, you guys are experiencing, I'm getting thumbs up so that I can see that you guys are also all experiencing in the same matter. Well, why does that really happen? This is usually where the clients actually started to find out or tell me, is that we were having our best sales month ever, but somehow we felt more pressure than before. And that's often first signal that channel economics need to be looked closer. The challenge is that the most brands elevate channels through margin lens, but sophisticated operators evaluate channels through the economic lens. Those are not the same thing. For example, let's compare direct-to-consumer channel to a wholesale channel. Most of our clients immediately assume direct-to-consumer is more profitable. And sometimes it is, but it's not always the case. Because direct-to-consumer comes with its own cost structure. The customer acquisition, fulfillment, returns, customer service, technology, marketing overhead, payment processing. And when those costs starts increasing, the economics can change very quickly. Meanwhile, wholesale often gets dismissed because the gross margin percentage is lower. But what wholesaler gives you a predictability on volume, on cost velocity, on lower fulfillment complexity, on lower customer acquisition cost, on lower operational burner. So what looks less profitable on paper can sometimes contribute more profit to the business than expected. But this is not true for every brand. We have clients who were capping mostly their business on wholesale. And when we redid their unit of economic by sales channel, we realized that actually doing a direct-to-consumer sales channel hybrid models that we've created for them was more profitable in the long run than continuing doing wholesale and tying up all of their resources in one wholesale bucket. Mary, when you were evaluating business performances, how important was margin percentage versus inventory return cash conversion?
Again, it depends on the channel. So, I mean, obviously, when it's super important that you take it into account. When you're doing direct to consumer, and all of a sudden that product's return rate goes way up. Now all of a sudden you have product that's coming back in that you have to store again, that you have to look at to see if it is even resellable. What's the slippage when you return merchandise? Again, depending on the size of your business, some of those could be extremely high. However, when you are in the wholesale realm, it's a whole different ballgame, because as you said, you're shipping it to a wholesaler in bulk. The cost is much lower. The return rate, depending on what you negotiate, could be nothing, or it could be something. Again, you need to reevaluate all those things and look at each of those different product lines and making sure that you take into account everything from commissions that you might have to pay out. I mean, Amazon's another channel. You have to look at all the different commissions that they're going to charge you, if you're going to store there, how much the extra storage is going to be. All those things are important depending on the size of your business is to how you should evaluate what channel you should go to.
And that's such an important distinction between many growing brands focusing heavily on margin percentage while underestimating the value of cash velocity. And here's something that doesn't get talked about enough is that you don't pay suppliers with a gross margin. You pay suppliers with cash, right? So let's just kind of sit on that and think about it. So when we're evaluating channels, we have to think about beyond profitability percentage. We need to think about how effectively those channels convert inventory into cash. Let me ask you really, and this is a question again to everyone, which metric gets more attention in your business today? Is it a margin percentage or is it inventory return? Right? And most brands spend far more time discussing margin than inventory productivity. Yet inventory is usually where the cash gets trapped. And this becomes even more important when brands start adding channels, whether you're adding wholesale, direct-to-consumer, Amazon, marketplace, other marketplaces, international distribution, retail partners, because now you're no longer managing one economic model, you are managing multiple economic models simultaneously. And what often happens is that the teams treat all channels as interchangeable. The same product, same assumptions, same expectations, but channels behave differently. Customers behave differently. Return rates behave differently. Promotional behaviors differently as well. So the question isn't what channel is best. The question really needs to always be asked, which channels is the best for this particular product? That is completely different conversation than just analyzing and saying which channel is the best just in general. And the most really sophisticated brands we work with, they really don't ask, where should we sell? They ask us, where should this SKU live to maximize profitability, cash flow, and customer value? That shift of thinking is really what changes everything. Because now we're not optimizing the channel, we're optimizing economics. And when we look at our assortment and our assortment distribution across channels, we are cherry picking a particular product, but potentially our whole total assortment that would be right for Amazon, that would be right for our direct sales, that would be right for wholesale. And not necessarily the formula that my whole assortment could be right for everything. It's usually not the case. Mary, how many times we have faced that with our clients?
Numerous times. They're usually very surprised when we start to, again, ask them questions about individual costs for individual products. They forget. They say, oh, but this one I thought only cost $1, but it costs $1.50 because I forgot that this 50-cent thing needs to be added to it. And now all of a sudden, it's just, as an accountant, as a financial person, asking enough questions really has surprised me at how confusing it is to a merchandiser or a founder as to the cost of their product.
Absolutely. And I want to leave you with a thought that may sound really counterintuitive, but the most dangerous phase in companies' growth, it's not a decline. It's where profitability looking like it's growing, but in reality, it's not. Because when sales are declining, everyone pays attention. Problems are obvious. Decisions get made quickly. Leadership becomes focused. But growth can really hide the problems, right? Growth can hide inefficiency of inventory. Growth can hide weak of forecasting. Growth can hide poor assortment decisions or your margin leakage, or even hide operational dysfunction altogether. And because revenue is increasing, everyone feels encouraged. The teams work much harder, and the founders or the business owners are pushing harder for the business to grow. But eventually something starts to feel different. Cash will get tighter, inventory will get heavier, forecasting becomes less reliable, and teams become more reactive. And every season feels more completing and more difficult and more complicated than the last. And this is usually the moment where a lot of our clients starts to asking very important questions. Why does the growth feel harder now than it did 2 years ago? And if you're asking that question right now, then definitely let's continue talking. Let's continue this topic of conversation. Let us help you do some of your audits to really understand and help you to define where some of those weak spots might be that you are able to refine and optimize. But before we wrap up, I want to take a step back and really connect everything we've discussed today. And Mary, thank you so much for your valuable insight and your perspective, because this conversation was never really about just the initial product margin or margins in general. It wasn't really about the gross margin either or contribution margin. It was really more about understanding the decisions that need to happen naturally when we are planning for an adoption of a product or adoption of or creating a new collection or creating a new brand and planning for that growth, right? When the most really brands start to feel this pressure is not when the assortments were small or the inventory when managed and the teams were lean when you were starting at the beginning, but you're starting to really feel it right after you kind of hit your 1 million mark and then your next 5 million mark and next 10 million mark and 15 and so forth. Every leap of your growth, you start to feel more of that pressure, which means you need to look at those numbers and you need to optimize those numbers even more rigorously than when you were starting up, because that's where everything is actually hiding. And believe it or not, whether if you are in an already growing brand and you think you guys have everything efficient and you think that this is not going to touch you, this is not your problem because you were doing well, ask yourself, are you really truly looking at everything that is under the hood, right? That is at the bottom line. And if not, talk to us. We'd love to help you with some of your audits and help you to brainstorm some of the opportunities. And we are going to finish up with the live event that we host every third Thursday of the month at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, where Path to Profit with Ye, we are continuing talking about the same subject. But if today we really talked about where to identify the profit leaks, where to look, we are going to talk in our live event on the Thursday of June 18th. We're going to talk about the how to actually do it, right? In today's roundtable was really intentionally designed around creating an awareness and the diagnosis. We focused on understanding how unit economics behaves inside the growing fashion business, where profitability is created, where it leaks, and why revenue growth often hides deeper structure issues. But the next logical question becomes, okay, well, now what? How do we actually create the system, right? How do we build out the system that helps us to predict this profitability? That's exactly what we're going to cover in upcoming Path to Profit live session on June 18th at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can register it on our LinkedIn page at Ye Designs, and you can also follow us on YouTube channel at Ye Designs. We are continuing to provide more value. We're going to continue to talk about the subject this month, and every month we have a new topic that we are going to uncover to help you succeed in your business. So please check out our topics of upcoming events, join them. We'd love to have you. Do share this content if you find this valuable with others that you think they can benefit from. Our goal is to provide value with every recording session that we do. I hope to see you guys next time. And again, thank you everyone for your time and for everything you have done and your energy today. And for everyone who've listened to us live and continuously joining in when we are looking at our community problems that we all face as business owners, we all face as executives who run retail and fashion brands. So thank you very much, and I will look forward to see you all next time.